Good morning, everyone. Shavua Tov, and welcome to our next class, our weekly class on the Parsha. And we are just about ready to begin. We are talking to you from out of town, so I don't have my regular Chumash with me. So I'm not going to be able to do any page numbers. If someone wants to share with us, someone who has a good Chumash, we're Parsha of Akev. This is the third Parsha in the book of Numbers, in the book of Bamidbar. Where does it begin? If anyone wants to share with us, if you have the Gut Chumash, it is the third Parsha, the Parsha of Akev, and it's a continuation of Moshe's talk. Moshe, towards the end of his life, he gathered the Jewish people at the beginning of Deuteronomy to speak to them, to rebuke them, to encourage them, to empower them going into Israel. And Moshe knew already at this point that he will not merit to be with them in Israel. He will pass away here on the east side of the Jordan River in the Sinai desert, and he will not enter into Israel with the rest of the Jewish people, his flock, his people, his nation. And he gathers the Jewish people and he speaks to them. And we had Devarim, the first Parsha, and V'eschanan last week. And this week of the Parsha of Akev is a continuation of his talk. It's an inspiring talk from the beginning to the end of the Parsha. It's almost like one long read, an easy read, an inspirational read, like a father speaking to a child. I'm sure there's a lot of emotions going on, knowing that Moshe will pass away soon, encouraging them going into Israel not to learn from their surroundings, from the lack of morals and ethics of the neighbors in Israel, but to stay close to God. And he also speaks about some of the things that happened over the 40 years that perhaps they could learn from, and not make those same mistakes that they made. Just to give a general overview on the parsha. General overview of the parsha. We have the beginning of the parsha is where Moshe begins. V'haya ekev tishme'un. If you following God's ways, right away the word akev, which means if. And Rashi says another interpretation to the word akev can mean the heel, which means, what does it mean? The heel of a person, the heel. The idea is that there are certain mitzvahs, certain commandments which we kind of tremble upon. We walk over with our heel. We feel that they're not so important. These are the small mitzvahs. These are the minor mitzvahs. I'm keeping the big ones. The big 10 or the big whatever it is in my mind that are big. And ultimately we realize that there is no big and small mitzvah. So even the mitzvahs that we tread over with our heel, those mitzvahs we have to keep. And if we do, God will give us all the blessings. So that's the opening of the parsha. We have over here that Moshe talks about what happened when the Jewish people come into Israel, and they may say, the Jewish people, the nations of the world are too strong for us. How can we conquer them? How can we win over them? How can we take possession of the land of Israel? It's too much. And Moshe says, don't worry, God is on your side. You don't have to fear them, because God is always with you. It reminds me of the Altira prayer that we say in the morning. Altira, mi pachad peace. Don't be feared. Don't be scared. God is with us. God is powerful. God is capable. Moshe talks about briefly the manna that fell from heaven for 40 years that the Jewish people enjoyed. And we'll get back to this, to speak about this in greater depth. Moshe mentions the beauty of Israel. He mentions here the 7 species that Israel was blessed with. We know that there are 2 grain. There's the wheat and barley, and then there's 5 fruits: the grapes, the olives, the dates, the pomegranates, and the what? We always have to forget one of them. Figs. He doesn't say figs, right? The 5 fruits. Here we have mentioned numerous times in this parsha. We refer to Israel as Eretz Zavas Cholav Udvash, the land flowing with milk and honey. You've heard that before, right? This is directly in this week's parsha. We have a reference to that. We speak about, Moshe talks about what happened when the Jewish people are successful. They're waging wars. They're settling the land. And they are successful, and they feel their heart will will raise, they'll feel very proud of themselves and say, wow, it's my strength, the strength and power of my own arm, my own hand that brought to me this beautiful success. No, Moshe says, that's a big, that's a pit hole. That's something you don't want to go. It's something you don't want to experience, because when you feel that this is my own success, you're kind of pushing God out of the picture. There's no room for Hashem. What does the Talmud tell us? The Talmud says that someone who's very egotistic, someone's very haughty, someone who's very proud of themselves, does not leave space for God. God cannot dwell with them. Moshe says, don't take too much credit. Always remember that there's God on your side. And this is something that we have to remember in our lives. Something that we have to, sometimes the state of Israel has to be careful. Thank God they have won many wars. They have been successful with the 6-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, the War of Independence. There are the many wars that they had major victories. But what is our response at the end of the war? Is our response that, wow, the Israeli army, strongest army in the world, wow, look what we could accomplish? Or is the response, wow, beautiful, look how God is on the Israeli side, wow, thank you, God, for this miracle? And sometimes at the moment we recognize God and then we forget about him. Just to give an example of the 6-Day War, if you read and listen or watch, even watch television from the time, and perhaps some of you may remember this in 1967. What was the feeling in Israel, even amongst the most secular, the ones who you never see with a yarmulke on their head? You never see them in a shul, even on Yom Kippur. And they were the ones who were crying at the Kotel, at the Western Wall. They were the ones who were dancing and thanking God for the miracle. What happened a year later? What happened 5 years later, 10 years later, 50 years later? Now already we know the strategy. Now we know the great heroes of the war with all the generals and all, which is true. Obviously, we can't sit. We have to do our part. We also have to recognize at the same time that there was God's hand. And this is what Moshe tells the Jewish people going into Israel. Remember, you're going to be successful. You're going to do very well. And you might take the credit fully for yourselves. Remember, it's God. There was a story, actually, Rabbi Akiva, in his time, this is going back, a number of years after the destruction of the temple, where there was a rebellion against the Romans. And there was a man named Bar Kokhba, which means the star. Bar Koziba, some called him. And he was a very successful Jewish king. And many felt that he was actually the Messiah. He was a righteous person. Even Rabbi Akiva felt that he was the anointed one, the Messiah. And what happened was, eventually he took too much credit for himself. He forgot to recognize, to attribute his victories to God. And what happened was, he wasn't successful the next time. So this is something that Moshe warns the Jewish people going into Israel. Going on, the Parsha, Moshe reminisces, or he retells the story of the sin of the golden calf, the breaking of the tablets, the breaking of the luchos. Talks about how God instructed him to make the second set of tablets. Talks about Moshe's beseeching God to forgive the Jewish people, not to wipe them out, but to have a second chance. He prays on their behalf. We have in the Parsha the second portion of this Shema. As we know, there are 3 portions to the Shema. We say Shema, Yisrael, Ve'ahavta Es is the first portion. The second portion is the V'haya portion. V'haya im Shemaya Tishma. What will be if you will listen in God's ways, and God, all the beautiful blessings, the rain in its time, etc., that will come. That's in this week's Parsha, the second portion of the Shema. It's a beautiful, beautiful Parsha. I want to just zero in, as we always do, on one portion, on one area of the Parsha, and that is what we mentioned earlier, the story of the manna that came from heaven. So obviously, the actual story of the manna from heaven is told over in Exodus and Shemos, in the Parsha of Beshalach, where it actually came down for the first time with the Jewish people. They finished their food that they took out from Egypt with them, and now they were hungry. So God gives them the manna for heaven for 40 years. Imagine that. You wake up in the morning, it falls from the sky. like the dew that falls in the morning, together with it fell food from heaven. When they made a blessing, when we eat bread, we make a blessing. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. What does that mean? That God brings forth food from the ground, from the earth. When they ate the manna, blessing they said Hamotzi lechem min hashamayim, who brought forth food from heaven, literally. So the verse, and again, I don't have the exact page number because I don't have the Chumash with me. It's in the chapter 8. Moshe says, remember the path that God took you for 40 years. God was testing you. We use the word anoischa. What does that mean? And the next verse continues. Vaya'ancha vayarivecha. God ya'ancha. What does that mean? He brought pain to you, it seems like. He starved you. And then he fed you the manna, which you did not know of before, and your fathers did not know of. In verse 16, in chapter 8, God, I gave you, and I fed you in the manna in the desert. Leman anoischa. He was seemingly causing you pain, testing you. What does this mean? What does it mean that the manna was causing pain to the person? Rashi here does not really talk about the word anoischa. But the Talmud, in the Tractate of Yuma, says the interesting thing. He says that although the manna from heaven was this beautiful thing, obviously it fed the Jewish people. They didn't have to toil, they didn't have to work the ground. It was just easy. They came out, walked out of their house at the doorstep. For many, they had manna. For some, they had to walk a little bit, but it was there. But it brought somewhat a degree of starvation. It didn't fully satiate them. For 40 years, they weren't fully satiated. So this is what the Talmud says, and it's puzzling a little bit because we know so much about the manna, the beauty of the manna, the miracle of the manna from heaven. We do today many things in our tradition to remember the manna from heaven. At a typical traditional Shabbos dinner, how many challahs are we supposed to have? 2 challahs, right? Well, I'm not that hungry. I'm not eating 2 challahs tonight. 1 small challah is enough for me. No, we're supposed to have 2. Why 2? Why specifically 2? The answer is because we know that the manna from heaven only fell 6 days a week. The manna did not fall on Shabbos. On Friday, 2 portions of manna fell. They collected on Friday for Friday and for Shabbos. And in fact, throughout the week, it was forbidden for them to collect more than they needed. Each person had the omer, they had the exact measurement that they were allowed to collect. And whether you collected more or less, this is what you got. Those who tried collecting more, it would spoil. It would have rotted. So there was a specific amount. This is the amount. They actually had it was a forbidden. It was a transgression. You were not allowed to save the manna from day to day. Hey, I only ate it. I'm not so hungry today. Let me put it away in the fridge. I'll have it tomorrow morning for breakfast. No. You ate today's portion. That was it. Tomorrow, you got a new portion. You weren't allowed to keep it from day to day. But on Friday, they got 2 portions for Friday and for Shabbos. So that's why 3,000 years later, we are eating, or at least having on our table, 2 challahs, even if we're only eating 1. But we make the blessing Hamotzi Lechem on 2 challahs to remember what happened in the desert, that they had this special double portion of manna. There's another interesting tradition, perhaps we're not so aware of it, right? When we make kiddush, what's the tradition? We have challah on the table. There's a challah board, right? We have a challah board, a little tray that we put the challah on. And then we cover it. We cover it with a challah cover. But why do we do that? It may be convenient, right? You don't want to put the challah directly on the table, so you put it on the tray. It's easier to cut later. You want to cover it, that's just nice, right? It's a nice challah, Shabbos challah cover, has embroidery on it or whatever, right? It's a nice touch to our Shabbos decor. But truthfully, it's not just a beauty, it's actually part of the tradition, specifically to have something beneath the challah and something over the challah. So the challah is always like a sandwich in between two things. And that's very specific. Again, to remember the manna that fell in the desert. But when the manna fell, first there was a layer of dew that fell. This is what the Torah describes, a layer of dew. The manna would fall on this dew, and then another layer would come and cover it. So the manna was like covered with layers of dew from either side. So we remember this as well, the small little detail. But for whatever reason, the Torah felt it important to even mention this detail, that there was dew on either side. So too, in our Shabbos table, we have a layer under it, the challah board, or a plate or something, and the layer on top, the challah cover. Small little details, but obviously the manna was very significant in Jewish history. We all know when we bench, right? The grace after meal, Baruch atah Hazan atah, right? We say the blessing Hazan, right? If you notice, in that blessing, we don't mention anything about God giving food from the ground, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, from the ground. In the second blessing, we might not be so familiar with the second blessing is Noda lecha, right? Let me bless. I'm thankful to you for our food. In the second blessing, we conclude al haaretz, right? For the food from the ground. In the first blessing, we don't mention the food from the ground, from the earth. And the reason for this is because the first blessing was enacted by Moshe, to give thanks for the manna from heaven. Joshua, he later enacted the second blessing to give thanks for the food from the ground. That's when they were in Israel. But for the 40 years in the desert, they didn't have food from the ground. They had food from the heaven. So that's why in that blessing, there's no mention of food from the ground. So these are small things, but the point is that the idea of manna is not just a nice historic, fact, but it's something that's so important to in our tradition today. We have so many things that are to remember the manna from heaven. And at the same time, the Talmud tells us that it didn't fully satiate. It was somewhat painful. Vaya'ancha, God pained us. God not tortured us, but brought us some pain, some affliction. He mentioned numerous times that the manna was some type of affliction. So what does this mean? So one of the interpretations that the Rebbe gives numerous times is that this is not literal. We're not saying literally that it brought affliction over the Jewish people. Of course not. It was a beautiful, food from heaven that and we're thankful to God for it. What it means that it brought some affliction to us, it means that there was somewhat a lack of security. We all like to feel secure, and when we say we feel secure, means that we know what's happening tomorrow. We have a plan. We have it worked out. That brings security. One of the big things that was happening, or perhaps is happening now again, unfortunately, but over the last year and a half, was a lack of security. What's going to be tomorrow? What's going to be in a week? What's going to be in 3 weeks? Right? We don't know what's happening. We always have to have a handle on the situation. We have to feel like we are somewhat in control. So when we are planning our day or our life or whatever, right? We always know we always have savings, right? Financial advisors always tell you always have to have a savings account, an emergency fund, right? What happens if you lose your job? What happens if suddenly you have no income? You have to have at least 3 months of emergency fund, right? You have to have whatever the cost of living is for a month. You have to have at least a month, 2 or 3 months, in case you are between jobs, in case some type of whatever, something happens, right? You have to have that security fund. Jewish people in the desert didn't have a security fund, at least in their minds, because they weren't able to keep the manna from day to day. It was, okay, we're done for today. We have nothing for tomorrow. They were forced to trust in God and truly trust in God. In fact, there are some customs, some sitters have every day they read the portion of the manna to, read a few verses that talk about the manna in order to instill in the person the sense of trust in God. It says, hey, when the Jewish people were in Israel, were in the desert, they didn't have that security. They didn't have like, oh, at least I know I have enough for tomorrow. They didn't have that. They were forced to trust in Hashem. God will provide. If you were able to have that trust, there's no greater security than that. Feeling that, oh, God will take care of me. But if we lack a little bit of that trust and we don't have for tomorrow, we feel afflicted, we feel pain, we feel a little lost. And that's the message of the story of the manna. The message is that don't feel that way. Yes, you have to do what your financial advisor tells you to do. At the same time, you have to have this trust in God. God will take care of you. God will provide. You do your part. You do your part, and then put your hands and trust in God. They say the story. There was this great Hasidic master. His name was Rabbi Zusha. He lived in a town of Annapolis. And he was once, there were children, children were wild, mischievous, not just today, but 200 years ago as well. And what the children of Annapolis, what they would do is that when they would, sometimes, obviously before paved roads, there were a lot of mud, a lot of wet mud in the roads. And what people would do is they would put like a wooden, planks of wood to cover it so people could walk over it. And the children were having fun one day. They were like standing from a distance, and then when they were to watch someone about to step onto this plank of wood, they would pull the plank of wood from under them, and they would step into the mud. Oh, it was so much fun. The kids loved it. Well, one day, this Rabbi Zusha, one of the great sages, one of the great rabbis, and of Annapolis, was walking deep in thought, and the children didn't notice who it was, and they just pulled the plank of wood under his foot, and he fell into the mud. And they were laughing, but then when they saw who it was, they realized their mistake. Like, oh, Rabbi Zusha, this is what we did. How could we do this? They felt so bad. They felt terrible, actually. They went to the parents. What could we do? We heard what happened. We were playing. I'm sorry. We were irresponsible. And Rabbi Zusha got all full of mud. So the parents said, you know what? We know what you have to do tomorrow. Rabbi Zusha, he sits all day in the synagogue. And he studies. He doesn't eat that much. I think we should prepare for him a nice lunch. And we should bring a lunch to him in the synagogue. Wow, great idea. The kids got together. They prepared this really gourmet lunch. And they brought it to him at lunchtime. He was sitting in the synagogue, and they brought him lunch. There was someone who was in the synagogue at the time, and he went crazy when he saw these children bringing lunch. And he ran over to them and says, tell me, what happened? What happened? Why are you bringing them lunch today? So they told him what happened. He says, let me tell you what happened. I bring him lunch every single day. What happens is he prays for many hours. He studies for many hours. And at one point, he turns to heaven and he says a prayer. He says, God, please, I need some food. And when I hear that, I always feel so bad for him. So I always bring him lunch. So for whatever months, for the last few months, I've been bringing him lunch every day. Last night, I was thinking about this. I was thinking, Zusha, go find your own food. Every day I'm bringing you lunch. Figure it out on your own. You think that lunch comes from heaven? What's going to happen if one day I don't bring you lunch? And this was the day I say, you know what? I'm not bringing him lunch. Let me see what happens. And today, out of nowhere, a child walks in and brings him lunch. I realize now that God provides to Zusha. Now, Zusha was obviously unique. we have to do our part. We have to go out there and prepare food and have a living. We have to do take natural means to provide. But we always have to recognize God provides. And this is the message from the manna. This is what Moshe was telling them. For 40 years, God afflicted you with the manna. Not literally afflicted you. Of course, we enjoyed the manna for all these years. The point is, you were forced to trust in God. Because if you didn't trust in God, manna was an affliction. If you didn't trust in God, you had no security. What's going to be tomorrow? You were forbidden to keep it from day to day. You had to trust in God. You're going into Israel. This is all about going into Israel. Moshe says, you're not going to get the manna from heaven. Now is where it comes to the true test. Will you continue trusting in God at the same time that you're working the land and working for your food? Are you also going to trust in God, or are you going to say, God, take the back corner, the back burner? I got this, right? I have it under control. I mean, I probably said this a million times, where the guy that was trying to find the parking space in Manhattan, late for a meeting, really important meeting, and he was circling the street trying to find parking. It was impossible. He was devastated. He turns to God and says, God, I'll give you whatever you want. You want Shabbos, you want kosher, you want charity, visitors, anything. I'm doing it. You got it. I'm committed. I just need a parking space. And as he finishes his prayer, a guy right in front of him starts to pull out. He got his parking space and he says, hold it, God, hold it. I found it on my own. Right? So Moshe tells the Jewish people, listen, you were in the desert. You were forced to trust in God. You're going into Israel now. This is the test. Are you gonna feel that trust in God as well? What's interesting is that the night of the Seder, we part of the Seder step, we all know we take the middle matzah, right, and we break it in half. We put one half back into the Seder plate, but the other half we put away for the afikoman, right? We try to find it. We put it away. And the idea is at the end of the Seder, we take it out and we eat it. So what's this whole game, right? Like, just eat it. If you want to eat it, eat it. If you don't want to eat it, don't eat it. What's the idea of breaking it in half, putting it away, and then finding it and then eating it? Yeah, it's exciting for the kids, but what's the reason behind it? What's the reason why it's so important to break it and then eat it later? And one of the ideas that I read is that at the beginning of the Seder, we are compared to the Jewish people just leaving Egypt. We're still in that slavement mindset. And the mindset of a slave, the mindset of a person a poor person who doesn't have enough. So they're always worried about what's going to be tomorrow. So even when you give them a loaf of bread, they don't eat, they're very hungry. Hey, here's a loaf of bread. They don't eat the whole loaf of bread. They break it in half. I'll eat half today and half tomorrow because I'm happy that I got a loaf of bread today, but I don't know what's going to be tomorrow. I might not have my loaf of another opportunity to eat tomorrow. Let me save for tomorrow. So they're constantly saving for the next day. So at the beginning of the Seder, we're still in that mindset. So we have matzah, beautiful, but we got to break it because we're in the poor person mindset. So break it in half, put the other half away for later, just in case. Maybe we always have to have it just in case for later. But at the end of the Seder, now we're already in the freedom mindset. We're in the mindset of free people. We're in the mindset of people who have what they need, who trust in God. True freedom is not about how much resources a person has. It's really a freedom and a mindset of freedom. Mindset of freedom is that I know that I'm connected to God and I have the power and God is with me. That's the mindset of freedom. Now I have that mindset. Now I can eat the leftovers. I can eat what I left for tomorrow because I don't need for tomorrow because I know that God will provide. It's a different mindset. It's a mindset of a free person. It's a mindset of a person who's connected to its source, connected to God. Just to conclude with another interesting story that I probably, or anecdote, an idea that I probably mentioned in the past as well, where the mother and the toddler, and the mother and the infant, who took a trip around the world, took a cross country or around the world trip. They took many flights. They went from New Orleans, they went to New York. From New York, they went to London. From London, they went to Paris. From Paris, they went to Israel. From Israel, they went to Russia, and they went to the Far East, and they went across the world, right? Many, many ups and downs, went on the plane and off the plane, in the hotel, into the car, out of the car, right? A lot of places. And after this long, journey, they asked the mother, "Nu, how was it? How was your trip?" And the mother says, "It was beautiful. I loved it. Very, very tiring. I was on the plane and I was off the plane. I was in the hotel and out of the hotel, in the car, out of the car. I walked here, I went there, this tour, that tour, right? It's very, very tiring. A lot of different places." Then they asked the toddler, "Nu, how was your trip? Where did you go?" Toddler says, "Me? I didn't go anywhere. The whole time, the entire time, I was just in my mother's arms. I didn't go anywhere. I was in my mother's arms." Okay, my mother was on the plane, off the plane. That makes no difference to me. I was in my mother's arms. And that is the idea over here. A lot of turbulence in our lives, perhaps, in the ups and downs. But if we feel that we're in our mother's hands, we're in our mother's arms, that's where we are. We feel that security. We don't feel we don't get nervous with all that's going on around us. Yes, we have to do our part. We're not saying we got to sit around and just twirl our fingers. We got to do our part. But that sense of security that we're supposed to have, that we are in our mother's arms. God is with us. God is holding our arms, holding our hand with us. And it will be good to have that trust in God. That is the message from the story of the manna. So that is my little thought on this week's Parsha. And I hope you enjoyed. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure.